Hi, guys. Oh gosh, I am so excited today. Okay, today's guest is someone who has spent her career operating in environments where the stakes are high and the cost of getting it wrong is very real. Melissa, I'm going to screw this up, so let me say it very slowly. Melissa Aarskaug. Okay, did I get that right? Yes. Okay. Melissa Aarskaug is an executive leader, speaker, and founder of Executive Connect, where she helps leaders navigate complexity and make better decisions, especially in the moments where technology, risk, and growth all collide. With a background in civil engineering and more than 15 years in cybersecurity, enterprise technology, and executive leadership, Melissa has been the person called in when things are already breaking and clarity matters the most. She's also spoken on over 85 stages around the world and spent thousands of hours behind the mic. But what makes her perspective so powerful is that she's not speaking from theory, she's lived it. At the core of her work is a simple but powerful belief that most leaders don't actually have a technology problem. They have a decision problem. Oh my gosh, this is so true. Melissa, I'm so excited to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me. Let's unpack a lot of this good stuff.
Oh my gosh, I have been thinking about you coming on, and I'm so excited because you really are getting in the mix of it when things are just, blowing up and exploding. We seem to have a lot of that going on lately. So I'm really interested to hear your take on a few things. But before we go into all of your stuff, all of your fabulous business, I always start out with every guest with the same question, and it's really um, before we get into all your leadership, all of the things you've built, who was Melissa growing up? What was younger Melissa like?
Yes, I was actually really independent from a very, very young age. Three, four, carrying my younger brother around, helping change his diapers and, sort through things for my mom. Not in a way where I had life figured out, but in a way where I just understood very young and very early that I needed to figure some things out. I was very observant. I paid attention to people. Most of those people were substantially older than me. I paid attention to how they made decisions, what they were talking about, and I just lived in that kind of curious George mentality from a very young age. As I got older, I started to dream a little bigger. At one point, I wanted to be a singer. At the other point, I wanted to be a doctor, which is really kind of funny thinking about the two because they're
No
two very
limits,
different.
no limits to what you
Right,
could do.
right, no limits. Two very different paths, but if you think about a singer and a doctor, both come from the same place. I wanted to impact people, I wanted to help, I wanted to connect. I just didn't know what that was going to look like for me. So I became more curious, independent, and I tried to understand it all. Looking back on it now, I'm very interested in wellness and longevity, and I have a podcast. And so maybe it's some weird way I ended up doing what I set out to do at 5.
It's that's so funny. We were talking before we got on the podcast, and we're cut from the same cloth, very similar in certain ways. And I am cracking up when you're talking about listening to the older people and being very interested in what they said. I was with some extended family this past weekend, and my aunt was talking about how I was such a funny little kid because I wanted to sit at the table with the adults. I wanted to sit in their conversation. I wanted to chat with them. I wanted to be doing all the things that the adults were doing. I didn't care about what the kids were doing. I wasn't, you know, ready to go out and play in the mud, although I did that too. But I think that's really funny that you said that. That cracks me up.
There's so much truth. I mean, I was so comfortable asking the bizarre questions, like just the uncomfortable, like, why is this 5-year-old asking me about my beer or about my bra or about whatever? Like, I was that kind of kid that it didn't matter what I was curious. My mother a lot of times would be like, oh my gosh. My mom was always like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And I laugh now because even as an adult, she's still like, oh my gosh, Melissa.
That's amazing. I love that it's carried on, the endless curiosity. I think that's the smartest people are always the most curious, asking the most questions. Okay, you've said that you started working at a really young age, outside of just being curious, and have always had this mindset of figuring things out early. Where do you think that drive came from? Where do you think that came from?
Yeah, it's funny. So I lived in a neighborhood and at a time where we got home off the bus, we got on our bikes, and we went out and played with the neighborhood kids. And we didn't come home till the street lights went on and dinner was ready. And so I was out one day playing with all the kids that were younger and older than me. And a man walked up to me and he said, "Hey, I'd like to have you babysit for me." And I did what any 8-year-old kid would do. I said, "Sure, how much does it pay?" And he said $1 an hour. And I'm like, "Great, when do I start?" Well, I didn't really know what I was getting into because when I showed up to his house to start babysitting, there were 3 kids under 5. And so that was really fun. And I was 8, mind you. And I remember
You really made that dollar worth it.
he was getting a deal. And just, for all the kind of listeners, my parents lived down the street. There was no child labor. My mom came over when I was staying after a certain period of time. So when I tell my friends, they're like, "Melissa, that's an issue at 8." I'm like, "No, it's not. It's a responsibility."
This is how it was.
It just was how it was, right? And I remember someone telling me, if you save this money, this $1, it's going to turn into some big, big things or something bigger. And so I was thinking, I'm like, okay, my dollar can turn into at the time I didn't know. I was 8, mind you. I'm like, if I could double my dollar, this sounds fantastic. And I had no idea of money. My parents didn't grow up teaching me about money. And so, but the idea stuck with me, right? And because it wasn't about the money for me. It was about that realization that I could create something for myself. I didn't need my parents. So by the time, fast forward from 8 to 15, by the time I was 15, every Sunday my father would read the newspaper, we'd have our cereal, we'd talk. And I remember one Sunday, I would just keep collecting his newspapers and look through all these cars. And I was 15 at the time, didn't have a license, didn't have a permit. And I found this perfect car I wanted. It was a maroon Honda Civic, but I was really adamant as a kid. I wanted a sunroof and I wanted a stick shift to drive.
Why did we all want sunroofs? I don't know.
I have no idea, right? And I wanted loud speakers, right? I wanted to listen to really loud music. So I bring over this newspaper clipping to my father and I said, "Dad, I want to buy this car." And he's like, "You can't drive. You don't have any money." "No." And I'm like, "Well, I have the money. I just need you to teach me how to drive so I could drive it myself." And my dad just was completely blown away that I had every week been depositing. My mom was taking me to the bank and my mom didn't think anything of it. An envelope of money. I handed it to the teller and we just did this every week, right? So everything changed for me, right? I bought the car. And
Impressive.
Now I had even more independence. I had the mobility, I had the options. I just needed to get that driver's license. And so once you feel that early and young, you really never want to give that up. For me, I laugh because my brother was the exact opposite of me. And I told him, "Okay, now that I got the car, I want to put a pink fluffy steering wheel cover. I want to put these really loud, obnoxious speakers in this Honda Civic." My brother was so upset that I put these loud, obnoxious, bass speakers in my car. He's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I just like loud music." And so I think my drive came from that, right? I think, that independence, getting in your car and being able to drive yourself to school or drive yourself to the grocery store, it really led to some amazing outcomes and in my life and that I had more control over my life than I actually thought when I was 4.
It's really interesting. I have an older child. She's not really a child anymore, but she's about to be 28. And what was so different from when I was a kid to when she was a kid, I mean, I couldn't have gotten my permit fast enough. I could not, like the second it was allowed, I had it. And the second I could be driving, and probably many years prior to that when I shouldn't have been driving, I was ready. Like as soon as I had that permit, I was ready to like travel across the country. And I think that's so interesting how that shifted so dramatically. But I was exactly the same way. It was like, get me, I need to get out of here. I need to go do things. I need to do whatever I feel like, have these like ideas the same way of just like getting out and doing. It was like, it was the freedom of mastering your own destiny or whatever in the moment. We probably didn't realize it then, but
No, we didn't. And the funny part about that, though, is I saw my friends' parents buy their children, you know, really expensive cars. My parents had bought way outside the city, and then the city kind of moved where we lived. So it became like the up and coming neighborhood for several pro athletes' kids. So some of the kids my brother went to school with were being dropped off in Bentleys. Their kids had Mercedes and these really nice vehicles. What I noticed for me, though, the way I looked at things were so different. I washed my car, I took care of it. If somebody had muddy feet to get into my car, I would, put paper down so my car wasn't muddied because it was mine. I earned
right.
it. I wanted to take care of it. I had pride in it.
I think that makes a huge difference. I mean, when you're working for it and you're paying for it, even if it's a hunk of junk, you're like, this is the best thing ever. And it makes a difference on how you take care of it and how you look at it. You started your, shifting to your career. You started in civil engineering and you moved into cybersecurity and executive leadership, which is really a big shift, all three. But what pulled you in that direction, and how did your thinking evolve along the way as you made those transitions?
Yeah. So tying it back to the man I started babysitting with, he's what I would call was my rich dad, right? He's a partner at a civil engineering firm. And I also babysat for another family that worked in banking as an executive at a big bank at the time. And it's funny how like life collides and life happens. So I'm in high school, I'm going to the restroom. I was a junior in high school, and the dean of the College of Engineering was coming to speak to our school. I just happened to walk past the man on the way to the restroom, and the man said, "Hey, are you good at math?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I guess. I mean, I'm good at math." And he's like, "I need you to come to listen to our presentation on engineering." Well, it didn't click at the time. Even I had been babysitting for this man for 6 years, 7 years at this point, and we never really talked about civil engineering a ton. He, took me around doing things with him, but it didn't click that I was going to study civil engineering until I ran into somebody quite literally on the way to the restroom. So I ended up going to that school, getting a full ride scholarship for sports and studies. And I had scholarships around the United States because I was a really good track runner. And so I started in civil engineering. And really what civil engineering and engineering gave me was a way to see systems and how things are built, how they function, where they break down. I quite literally see where things break down, and I understand how to fix them, whether that's engineering or HR or people or whatever it may be. I quite literally see the system. But over time, what I realized about myself is inside companies and inside systems, I could figure things out and those issues really well, and I could solve for them. So I could problem solve, and I'm super comfortable stepping in areas I know absolutely nothing about, and fixing them, whether it's a car or an HR, or it doesn't matter what it is. This really led me to cybersecurity. So at the time, I was working for a company. By the way, I was working at civil engineering. I was applying for a job for another company I thought I was going to get the job for because a girlfriend of mine was hiring for the role. What I actually did, Carrie, was apply for the wrong job. I
Oops.
had the only two things on the job description that I could do was I could travel and I had a degree. So I went in for the interview, took a substantially large pay cut, worked in the casino gaming company in compliance. And that's how I got into cybersecurity. That company, I had the privilege to build out their entire cybersecurity program around the world. And because of cybersecurity, it's really about understanding where systems are vulnerable and protecting what matters most. And those systems could be our own personal systems. Those systems could be companies' systems. It really just doesn't matter. And so from there, I naturally evolved into leadership for about 20 years of my life because I could solve problems. And I didn't necessarily know what I was doing in solving problems. I just could solve them. And so, the decisions behind all of this was really solving problems in a system. And so I really didn't pivot. I just layered on what I knew from where I started. And so I went from building bridges and water treatment facilities and doing hydraulics and hydrology. So building, things, to building systems, and then to protecting systems, to helping make leaders build better decisions inside their systems. And so it's really kind of a common thread. And what I kind of tell a lot of people is, we get in this place in our life where like, we can't do that. I don't have any experience in that, or I've left this company and I don't know if I could do this other thing. But the thing is when we leave jobs or we leave things, we take all that knowledge with us, all those experiences, and it's really up to us to unpack what we learned to take it forward to our next thing. Because coming from engineering into cybersecurity is what helped me explain it to the people that I work with. So I'm an engineer brain person that can communicate. So I am like the bridge between the CEOs and the technical people.
Yeah, I like how you how you come to each of those issues, regardless of what industry you're in or what company you're in, you're looking at it from that engineering point of view or perspective, that taking it apart and putting it back together. And I think that gives you a really big advantage, because I don't think a lot of people really look at things like that. Not necessarily. Now, I've worked with engineers over my whole career and have really gotten used to how they look at things. And it's so unique and it's so special, but it is different than a lot of the way the rest of the world looks at things. So I think that's such an advantage for you, and so cool that you were able to connect those dots and relate it to something like, you're like, okay, I'm a civil engineer, I'm doing civil engineering, but when I take a step back and move into something else, I'm able to break things down in the same way and use that knowledge to have it push my career along in other ways. I love that concept, because I don't think, like I said, I don't think everybody really does that. Even, typically, an engineer stays in that lane. They stay, if they start out in civil engineering, they're going to stay in civil engineering, or any other plethora of of other roles. But I think it's really interesting and unique that you have been able to transpose that knowledge into other industries and in other spaces. It's very unique and special, I think. You've spent your career in environments where getting it wrong impacts revenue, trust, and quite frankly, the entire organization. What does decision making look like when the stakes are that high? Like, what's going through your mind in those moments? And second part of that question, and I'll ask it again if we get too far off track here, but what can leaders do to try to avoid getting it wrong? So what do the stakes look like when they're that high, and what can leaders do to avoid getting it wrong?
Yeah, and I want to make one more really interesting point about what I did. So I've made a ton of mistakes in my life, like, just for the record. Like, a lot of times when I speak, women are like, oh, wow, you did this and you did that and you went up. I made a lot of mistakes, but the one thing through all of this that I want to unpack a little more is I betted on myself. Taking that job and taking a humongous pay cut in a space I knew no one and I had none of the information to learn. I think that's the key, is betting on yourself and trusting that you might not know it all, but you can figure it out and you're resourced enough to figure it out. And if you're not resourced like I was, get resourced. So get educated. So work longer hours, ask people help, shadow people. And that's what I did. I just got out to see the customers to understand what I needed to learn. And they taught me, and I learned all of that on someone else's dime.
Well, and I think that's a great point, because I think especially younger women that are coming into the corporate world, they think, "Oh, this is a path that goes left to right and it goes up, and it's just one gradual line that goes up." And it's for those that are listening and can't see, it's a wiggly line, right? The line is going all over, up and down, in between, in and out, and it's full of mistakes. And that's where we learn. We learn from the mistakes. Hopefully, if everything's going perfectly, you're not learning anything. You're appreciating it. Hopefully you're enjoying it, but you're not learning. I mean, you're learning when the shit hits the fan. That's when you're learning.
And that's another kind of key point is if there were times in my career where I stopped learning and I should have pivoted sooner because I stopped learning. And that is, to your point, key. If you're not learning, you're not growing, and you're starting to get stagnant. And so that's a sign and a symptom that you need to either educate up or tool up or switch careers. And so back to your question about the high stakes environment, when you're in a high stakes environment, you don't have the luxury of like guessing, like maybe we can figure this out or let's work on it next week. The decisions impact revenue, they impact trust, they impact entire organizations. And so in those moments, what I do, and I've always done, if I need to make a huge decision on if I'm leaving a company or I'm staying at a company or I'm, getting a divorce, which I've had one of those, if I'm leaving entire cities and packing up my life to change directions, I slow things down. And those are so, so important. I slow things down. It seems so elementary and so really basic, but it helps me, get clear of what I need to do. So even when everything around me feels fast, I ask myself some questions. What actually matters here? What signals do I need to pay attention to? Is it just noise? And what decisions can I make to protect my downside while allowing for my upside? So when I took that pay cut, right, I took a huge pay cut, and what I was doing is I was betting on myself. And so I looked at my bills. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to have to make these changes. I developed a plan based on that. And I went after it. And I'm like, okay, it's going to take me about this long to get where I need to go. And again, as an engineer, I look at the end, I need to get this, my dream is this thing. And I just break it down into steps. And so, kind of back to the intro at the beginning, I don't believe mistakes come from a lack of intelligence. They come from rushing or reacting instead of thinking through things. And if I'm honest, what's really going through my mind instead of panicking and getting really emotional about the things that are happening to me, right? Because we can, most of my career was in male-dominated industries. I was the only woman most of the times, or if there was a woman, she was either in HR and civil engineering, or she worked in a different division. And so for me, I slow things down. I get control of my emotions. And if I have like an emotion that says, oh my gosh, I'm so fearful, or oh my gosh, I'm really anxious, or oh my gosh, I'm really stressed out, I unpack all that. And I get clarity really quick when I unpack it, or at least the pursuit of clarity. Like, I don't know if I believe everything's going to ever be super clear for me, but I take a step, I get a little bit more clarity, then I take another step and I get a little bit more clarity. But I think if leaders want to avoid getting things wrong more often, they need to get better at that, to slow down, to pause, to prioritize, and not treat everything like it's equally important, because it's not, right? At the time, I had no children, right? So I could make a different decision set. But if I have children like I do now, I have 4 children now, I would not have made the same decision set, right? I would have had to say, okay, I'm going to take less money. Here's what I need to do in the interim. Maybe I contribute less to, investments, or I, stop going to the spa, or I stop, donating money to my church or other things I donate to. I just get really laser focused. But that's the key is slowing down and not reacting.
I totally agree with that, because I think, in those high stakes moments, and anytime something is really emotional, you do tend to speed up because you're like, shit, I need to make a decision. Everybody's counting on me in whatever, whether it's business or personal. I need to do this. I need to do that. So it's like your fight or flight mode goes into hyperdrive. And really it's a great comment and a great thought as far as when you are moving into that space, slowing it down so that you can actually digest A, what's happening, and B, dissect it so that you can better see the pieces and you can better figure out how to then move forward with perhaps those pieces put together differently. Because typically if something's blowing up, those pieces are not going to look the same moving forward.
And it's fight or flight, right?
Yeah.
I think we're in a world right now that's fight or flight. We're, back to the Stone Ages, people, when they saw a tiger, they were fight or flight. They were reacting. But we're in a world now where technology, pop up this and pop up that, everything's technology. We're on this kind of fight or flight, emotional roller coaster, constant change. And it's hard to slow down. Like I have to be mindful to turn my phone off. Like I have to seriously be mindful of, okay, no phones. I'm going to go hide in my closet if I have to get clarity about something. I need to go lay on my yoga mat, or I need to take a walk in nature, because you can't do it during your day-to-day or when your phone's beeping at you. You got to really sit in it with nothing around you to get clear.
Yeah, and I think that's a good comment too of I need to go sit in my closet. I think sometimes we feel like we have to like schedule this thing, we have to schedule this retreat, we have to schedule this class, we have to do this, that, the other. It's like sometimes it's about just pausing for a minute, and the way you start your day, the way you end your day, these few moments in the midst of the chaos that is our lives. I think even acknowledging that and making space for that can have such a huge impact on how things affect you and what is affecting you, right? As opposed to just like, oh yeah, I'm going to get to that class next week. I'm going to get to that retreat next month. I'm going to save up all my pause for that specific thing I've pushed into my calendar, which I live and breathe by my calendar, so I understand the concept. But I think one thing we forget in the midst of chaos is that we do need to have those times where we're making a space for ourselves emotionally, mentally, to have a moment, whether it's in our closet or not.
And I'll tell you, like, you've been in this place, like, my career started in male dominated spaces, right? And I was emotional. I'm like, why is this guy yelling at me? I didn't even do anything. Here I am, like 17, just trying to learn how to do this thing. Or here I am, 22, with this huge. At the time, I was running a $500 million project in my early 20s, and I had people yelling at me all the time. I'm like, why are they yelling at me? And I reacted. I got too much in my emotions, and I started what I'm calling masking up to protect myself. And I think that's the other thing in looking back at it now. I wish I unpacked more of those emotions sooner, because I had to unpack them really and hard in my 30s. Because in my 20s, I was, Action Jackson, getting coffee for everyone and doing all these things and as helpful as I can. Oh, he's mad, I gotta help with his emotions. And oh, what did I do wrong? Even though I didn't do anything wrong, right? And so I think, in the world today, we really gotta unpack the emotions and why we're feeling away. Is it us? Is it them? not overthink it, and, be authentic to ourselves. And when someone is doing something wrong to us or managing us wrong, have an honest conversation.
Yeah, I think just from having time in male dominated spaces where as a woman, I think that gives a big perspective of men and women just function differently. I mean, it is a fact. I mean, but I think being able to look back on that part of your career and figure out what didn't work and what you can glean from that time, as far as there's a lot that men have to teach women and vice versa. I was just talking to somebody about this the other day. I was like, as women, we need to have the audacity of these men. These men have this audacity, and I'm saying this as a strength. It doesn't allow for things to get in the way because of what they are feeling or thinking about themselves. They just have the audacity to assume it's going to work. They're the right person for the job, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot we can learn from each other, but I think you looking back and trying to unpack it and understand it is really powerful. And it's what we all need to be doing throughout our entire career. I don't think that ever stops. I think the strongest leaders are constantly doing that, because there is some young 20 something that's on your team. There is some 50 something or 60 something that's getting close to retirement, and they're like, this is BS, man, I'm over it, So it's just it's a smorgasbord of like, how do I take those pieces of my life and my career and make them into something that I can actually give back to this team and lead them better, leave them better than I found them, right?
And I'll tell you, I love, like, the positive side for me of in working with men is I had that belief that I could do this and I could do that. And I always, my whole career made more than the boys. Every role I've ever had, from 17 forward, at one point I 10 times my income and I made 5 times as much as the boys. And so I think, that came from being around the boys, from watching what they were asking for. So, for those that are in the field, don't go victim. Like, I did that a little bit younger in my career. Go to learn, like, listen to how they're negotiating for themselves, because, no matter how we look at it, men are still in the C-suite because they make decisions faster and they don't stay in their emotions. They do it, to your point. We are different. We're more emotionals. It's the nature nurture thing. And so if you are in these spaces and places, learn from it.
Well, and I think it could be a whole other podcast conversation on its own of women grabbing things and going for it. And so often women leave so much on the table because they assume, oh, well, if they, think I'm worth it, they'll give it to me. And that's really quite BS. We all know this, right? You have to be aggressive and ask for what you're worth, because why not? What's the worst they could say? No. And then you're in the same spot you were in before. If they say yes, you're now 10 timesing your money. I think that's something that we need to learn to be better about in general, because I think a lot of times that nurture nature of ours is, we are like, oh, I'm nurturing HR's feelings. I'm nurturing the CEO's feelings. Forget about it. You don't need to do that. Are they paying your bills? No, they're not. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you love this conversation as much as I did. And we're not done yet. This continues in part 2, so make sure you come back and join us there. That's a wrap on today's episode of Carrie, It's Not That Serious. If this conversation resonated, subscribe and share it with a woman in power in your life. You can find more conversations, more community, and all the fun INTS merch you love at itsnotthatserious.com. We're building something meaningful here, and I'm so glad you're a part of it. Until next time, remember, it's not that serious.